Hello there. Here's what I read in July. To begin with, Passing by Nella Larson. Now, this book I actually put on another video, which I'll leave a link to in one of these corners. Um, and it was one of the classics that I meant to read in the 2020s because I'm a slow reader. I thought like I need to give myself a full decade if I want to read at least 20 classics. I'm sure I'll read more than 20, but we got to have good goals, achievable goals. Anyway, yeah, Nella Larson's book was actually the last one on that list, and it ended up being the first one because of the Black Lives Matter movement. I kind of felt I should just like get to one of the black classics that was on my list, and so I went for this one because I could find it easily online on the Gutenberg project, which was amazing because I've never used that website before. I'll leave a link to it in the description if you want to check it out. It's got basically all books that have gone out of print. No, not out of print. What am I saying? Books that have gone out of copyright. Their copyright has run out, so that they are just there available for the public, and anybody can read them in digital format. This might have been the first like proper ebook I've ever read. I'm not sure, but it was a really great experience because it was like a first edition book, so I could really like the typeset and like kind of the font and I don't know, it's just like the little flecks on the pages and everything was so old looking, and it was, I don't know, even the typos somehow like gave it this raw feeling, like, and it fit with the type of story being told, which felt like kind of like very readable and accessible and but personal and psychological, and like this really kind of like convincing and like fast-paced psychological, not a thriller, but like it read like a thriller almost. And yeah, I felt like I was reading a story that had just been like hewn from the rock of the writer's imagination and experience, because obviously like this was not autobiographical but like really drawn from the writer's life. So it's about two women, Claire and Irene, and they are both from a black neighborhood, and they're both black but they're both kind of white passing, but Claire ends up going into a life where she lives as white passing, whereas Irene marries a black man who doesn't pass as white, and so she ends up living in Harlem. This is 1920s America, and so it's like kind of there's this blossoming artistic and creative and like kind of small part of the black society in America has got this like what's the word, acceptance, social acceptance. Although obviously they still face all sorts of hurdles and stuff like that. Claire is really like vivacious and gets what she wants and a little bit artificial and shallow, but also like genuinely caring. And Irene is far more conservative and, thinks her family comes first, and, is kind of repulsed and yet attracted to Claire and Claire's lifestyle. And there's some like really like homoerotic undertones in the way that she describes Claire. And also like obviously a sort of repressed envy about the lifestyle that Claire has chosen, about like being able to pass as a white woman all the time, and also I guess for the danger of that, of just being able to do what you want, and but also living with the fear that you could be found out. Claire is also married to a white man who is very racist and like doesn't realize that he's married a black woman. So that's like another kind of dramatic and ironic little twist in the tale. Anyway, it's a really engaging, fun book, and I thought I would like it. I heard about it after I read about it in an essay, or chapter, I think, from Judith Butler, who sang his praises. But I didn't realize it was going to be one of my favorite books ever. Like, yeah, it was so... it just had this great energy to it, and this sort of, it felt so true, the sort of psychological realisms, even bits that were like obviously a little bit like made for fiction, they somehow like really rang true. They felt like real people, and I did a lot of this telling rather than showing about what was going on through the characters' minds and how they rationalize, well, just Irene, but you can kind of, from Irene's perspective, you can kind of see how the other characters are rationalizing things and understanding things and conceptualizing the world and finding their place in it. And it's just, yeah, it was really convincing. And because I like novels that are good at telling. I feel like too many novels take like modern novels, I mean, take the show don't tell thing a little bit too much to heart. And then, you know, because being able to tell something well is such an art form that I feel like is underappreciated. And this does it so well. And yeah, it's like a psychoanalyst's dream as well. So obviously there's a lot of issues to do with race, but also with sexuality and gender and class is a big one in this novel. And all of them intersect in Irene's relationship with Claire. One of the things that I feel like maybe didn't work so well is that I felt that the writer wanted us to like empathize way more with Irene and kind of see Claire as like irresponsible and like you know, like a bit manipulative and unpleasant and dishonest. But then as the novel goes on, we start to like realize that Irene also has her own like pretty like serious hang-ups and faults, which become more kind of dark and a little bit twisted as the novel goes on, and start to see Claire in a more sympathetic light. However, like I felt that maybe because of who I am, I just and like also friends that I've had, I was completely Team Claire from the beginning. And while I liked Irene, like I also kind of thought she was a bitch. So like yeah, that kind of didn't work for me. Like I was already more sympathetic for Claire, so I just became, you know, I didn't have that change, which I think the novel was trying to get out of me, of shifting allegiances. But it didn't matter because it was still really interesting to see how that unfolded, and you know, I got to feel this nice vindication where I was like, yeah, she is a bitch. Anyway, and Claire is actually really cool. But there's no like goody and baddie, right? Like they're all complex, real, psychologically intricate human beings. The way that the characters like struggle and like have their whole like kind of sense of self is built on the interstices. Is that a word? Interstices? Interstices. They're built on the edges of like different identities, race, gender, class, sexuality. It is so like modern and feels so like of the moment. So it's just nuts to think that this was being written and read in the 1920s. And I can totally see why this book has like enjoyed a revival in recent years. Now, at the beginning of the month, the lockdown, well, not the lockdown, but like a lot of things were starting to ease up in the country, and like people were going out more, and the numbers in Fukuoka, where I live, were at 0, even though they were going up in Tokyo. Everyone here was kind of relaxing a lot. So I went to see a friend, and I started some part-time jobs, and I kind of felt like life was getting back to normal. But one of the things I did was I took a train, which was really like refreshing. I like taking trains, and so I decided to take a book to read on the train. And yeah, reading a book on the train was just so weird because it's something that's so normal. It's like one of my favorite reading places, and yet so like kind of wow, I haven't done this in a while, and it felt kind of like edgy, like ooh, it's still coronavirus, but I'm reading a book on a train. And the book I chose was Lincoln in the Bardo, which I recently bought in a bookshop, and I'll put a video about the buying here or there. I'm not sure what corner it is. I developed this habit of reading Lincoln in the Bardo in the daytime and Passing in the nighttime. And there was something about that balance which just worked so well, and I can't really say why. With Passing, like it's more like a traditional story. So I felt like Larson was just telling me this story with a beginning, middle, end about these characters, and the chapters were a really nice, like sleepy length. It was kind of really psychological and engaging, and yet like very easy to read. So it was just a perfect kind of sleepy, you know, pre-sleep chapter to read. Like exciting, but not gonna like kind of activate your imagination too much so that you can't sleep. Whereas this one was way more like it's an experimental novel. It's got like quotations from different like newspapers or like books and memoirs and stuff like that, like all gathered, and that's interspersed with characters. That's interspersed with chapters of dialogue, which is written like a play. Like, let me see, just I can find one like this. So you can see like it's really like kind of fragmented all the way through. Yeah, that's the like one of the dialogue chapters, and then here you have stuff which is like from quotations and citations. So they really look, and they're, you know, designed to look very similar on the page. And so you get this kind of like fragmentary blur. But yeah, it was way more like, felt like investigative and journalistic, and like challenging in a way. So it was better to read in the daytime when I was fully awake. So the premise of this is that it takes the historical kind of truth. So it's kind of like historical, what's it called? Historical fiction, in that it's like Abraham Lincoln's son, Willie, died of a fever. I forget what sickness it was, during the Civil War. And Lincoln used to go and visit his grave, and for a time would like actually like take out the body and like hold the body, and then go home again. So it's pretty dark and sad. And that historical thing is what like Saunders bases his book on, because then it's called Lincoln in the Bardo. The Bardo is a like Buddhist concept, which I don't know anything about, but it's like limbo basically, and the graveyard is full of ghosts, including Willie Lincoln, and they're all kind of stuck in like many ghosts are, like unable to move on because they've all have like hang-ups and stuff to do with their life. So obviously it's about like kind of that learning to move on, and grief, and being trapped, and people who are stuck on their own convictions and stuff like that. And it's told in this weird like phantasmagorical way, which is just like voices all intermingling. But surprisingly, actually, it's very narrative. That said, because when the characters are speaking in their weird ghost-like way, they often describe the scene like he did this, she did that, there was a this, and like just describe what like things looked like. So it actually isn't all that like difficult to piece together what's going on. So in a way, it's not like a play, even though it's in dialogue, because the characters are constantly describing things and telling them in a story-like way. I didn't really like this book. I feel really bad about not liking this book, because like it was recommended to me and it sounds exactly like it's right up my alley. Like kind of I love a bit of history, and I love ghosts, and I love mixing the two, but I don't know, like this sort of modernist thing of taking lots of different voices and like building a strange phantasmagorical narrative out of them. I love that, and that's what that describes this book perfectly, and I just didn't click with it. So for the beginning, one thing that really got me is like, if you see here in this tiny chapter, they put the name of the person who's speaking at the bottom of what they say, not at the top, like in a play, right? So often you don't know who's speaking until you finish reading what they said, and that can be really confusing. And that really bothered me, actually, like, because I would like start reading a bit and then go, who's this? And my eyes would flip down, see, oh, it's this person, and then flip back up. And I had to do that through every chapter, so my eyes were just like all the time. And, it was going to give me a crick in the neck. So seriously, that was a problem at the beginning. And eventually I kind of decided, okay, I got to settle into this. I'm just going to read not knowing who is speaking. And just kind of skim over the names. And that kind of worked. But the thing is that a lot of the characters all sound the same. Boy, it's hot. I am sweating like a sweaty man. So it just felt, even though it's like a novel made up of different voices, it didn't feel like that. You know what I mean? It felt like basically one voice for most of it. That changes as it goes on, and about like the 2/3 of the way through, especially there's one ghost whose reason for staying is revealed, and it's really interesting, and it connects to this whole Bardo concept and this whole afterlife. Like his actual reason for being stuck in the graveyard is related to what the rules are of this kind of like fantasy afterlife world that Saunders has created. And that really works, because it makes his character more interesting. It makes me interested in like the world and like the story and like how everything works. And I don't know, and I think it's ironic and maybe important that part of the story, which really engaged me, had nothing to do with the Lincolns. Like maybe I think this book is really engaging to people who are already super invested in Abraham Lincoln, because like he's like a big thing in it, but I'm not. So there are a lot of images of that like will really stick with me, of the afterlife and of these ghosts, and a lot of those came in the last third. They were like, I don't know, these ghosts can go in and out of other people, like the living and themselves, like can pass through as ghosts do. But when they do, they have access to all of the other person's memories, thoughts, experiences, and like sense of self. So that leads to some really interesting like pieces of writing. And yeah, it was like it was engaging then, because you got a sense, it's weird that you got a sense of the different ghosts only when they kind of merged into one. There's a bit where a ghost is on a horse rider, and he's like kind of sleepy, so while he's like inhabiting the person on the horse, he sifts through and ends up a bit in the horse, and suddenly he realizes that like he loves oats and that he wants his blue blanket, and he's just got all these horsey feelings and he feels so alive, and then he quickly like gets back up into the person that he's supposed to be in. So that was really funny, and like that one that really did make me smile, and it was a great concept, and it was just a great little gag, and I don't know, like things like that were brilliant and really few and far in between for me. So yeah, I don't know, like the last third, like for almost all of this, it was a 2-star novel for me, and then the last third made me had to bring it up to a 3-star. But I'm like a Philistine because this book won the Booker Prize, and it's like everyone says it's great, everyone says it's amazing and experimental and wonderful, and yeah, just no, didn't do it for me. My third book is Tokyo Ueno Station. This book is kind of funny because like I made a big deal about buying Lincoln in the Bardo in that video, which was here or there, I forget. And because I don't buy books normally, and it was the first book I'd bought in a long time. First book I bought in a long time. So then what happened was I saw this on the shelf, and I was surprised because I actually know the translator, like not a great friend, more an acquaintance, but we met once at a friend's birthday brunch, I think it was, and we hung out and became Facebook friends, and we kind of like each other's things from time to time, and that's about it. But yeah, it was pretty cool because this book just came out, and I'm really happy for her, and I want to support her as a friend. So I thought, I want, this is the kind of thing I would pay money for, and I did not expect that it would be in Fukuoka so soon after being published in English. So I was really happy to see it on the shelves, and it wasn't like super expensive for a new book either, and I wanted to treat myself, so I thought, you know what, I'll just buy it, and I bought it. Also, like, I'd read the synopsis, and it sounded, again, like really great. It is about a homeless man in Tokyo Ueno Station, or more accurately, like the park outside Tokyo Ueno Station, Tokyo Ueno Park, and this guy is a homeless man, and he's a ghost, he's dead, and he's sort of stuck in the park. So, you know, he died, and he's like, why am I still homeless? You know, like, that really sucks. And, you know, like, it's already, just from the premise, it's interesting because it's this idea of, like, you know, not having anywhere to go, like, and just being kind of stuck still in this world fits both with homeless people and with ghosts. And so, like, it I don't know, the way that they make you think about the connection between these two types of person is really interesting. And also, yeah, just a book about homelessness or a homeless person in Japan kind of piques my interest because, you know, it's a really big issue here that not many people realize or talk about. And, you know, it's often quite political, like for political events like the Tokyo Olympics, they like really crack down on like shifting homeless people out of their not out of their shelters, but like out of their homes, like out of their makeshift homes and onto the streets, so making life much more dangerous for them. And there's lots of like things like that which are done in a very kind of hush hush, like let's keep this place nice and clean looking. It's a significant part of society in Japan which is ignored and treated like shit. So it's really interesting that a writer who is also Zainichi, which is like a Korean generation, Korean born in Japan, which doesn't sound like it makes sense, like why not just Japanese? But there's a whole history relating to World War II about why Zainichi is a separate category of identity. But yeah, basically she's has Korean identity but speaks Japanese, it's her birth language, and she writes in Japanese. Yumiri, the writer. And yeah, so she's got a really kind of interesting identity, like as an outsider and an insider. So writing about a homeless person sounds also like it would somehow fit, and it just sounded really intriguing for me. I was really excited to read this, and I kind of went into the thing that I was doing with Passing and Lincoln in the Bardo of doing one in the night, one in the day. So I kept Lincoln in the Bardo as my day book, and this became my night book. And it was really weird in a way because I was reading all these books about ghosts and about Lincoln in the Bardo, which has got this kind of like lots of characters, but really kind of just one voice going all the way through. And whereas this book had only one main character and we're all in his head, and it's a very not so experimental, it's classic kind of modernist stream of thought. So, you know, like we shift around perspectives, but it's always this ghost. It's like one consciousness kind of looking around at the world, and here's a memory, here's a past, here's a flower suddenly in front of me, and this reminds me of something in my childhood, and just like seamlessly moving between different like experiential points, as though like on a huge like constellation which maps out his life. And despite that kind of really smooth kind of reading and that one voice, it actually felt incredibly polyphonic, which is Mikhail Bakhtin's term for works which are made up of multiple voices, and which he thinks is a like kind of better literature, and which, to be honest, I do too when it comes to this and Lincoln and the Bardo, because seriously, this felt like I felt so immersed in the world, and it was just easy to read, and there were so many surprising things that came up and surprising points of view that I suddenly saw, despite the fact I was only in one person's head. Like, for example, one of my favorite bits is he, as a ghost, can kind of just go anywhere, and the consciousness follows these two women who are going through an art museum in the park, and they go. There's an exhibit of roses, like painted by this medieval time Spanish painter, just roses with no background, and the narrative goes between the conversations of the women, which is nothing to do with art. It's just like really mundane stuff about like their husbands, their families, like what they're gonna cook for dinner and stuff like that. So you have like a few lines of that, and then you'll get a description of one of the paintings, one of the roses, and each rose is described so beautifully using slightly, dare I say it, florid language, but it still like works. It's not like too much, and it doesn't like, you know, feel forced or like it's relying on so loads of metaphor and stuff to try and find new ways of talking about a rose. Like, it gives each rose this beautiful sense of uniqueness, and like, as well as giving it the scientific name, and then like the shape of the petals and the hue of the pink or the white or the red, and like what it puts you in mind of, and like, and every rose, like almost the texture of it you can feel in a little paragraph, and then back to the women talking, and then the rose, and then the women talking. And by itself it's kind of interesting, but also reading it knowing that what you're reading is somehow the experience of the ghost of a homeless man in Tokyo, who is, you know, like for the first time probably in this museum experiencing both of these things, is like alongside each other in this weird little alternating pattern, is just so fun to read. That said, like, and my main criticism of this book is that for all the windy loopiness, which feels good, and like the fact that these surprising moments suddenly burst out of nowhere, and you're like, what? Why are we here in this art gallery now with all these roses and like old women talking about their lives? Like, that was really great, but it doesn't really add to a full novel kind of experience, if that makes sense. What I mean is, like, these things that are sort of tangential and surprising are really delightful, and yet they kind of detract from a sense of there being an overarching theme or like plot, and that's not always a bad thing, but I do feel like if you're writing a novel, it needs to feel really like has to have some degree of cohesion, and this does. But like, some of my favorite bits were the bits where they felt like suddenly the idea of a different story appeared, and it was, you know, like a sketch of a story, and then it just kind of fell away again, and it didn't really, it's not that it didn't gel, it's that it didn't amount to something bigger. And that, in a way, fits the theme of the novel, that like this guy's life doesn't amount to anything particularly big. He's just like a kind of a normal guy with a tragic life, and there's lots of beautiful mundane things which are intriguing to read because of the way that they're so simple and yet tied to a bigger sense of tragedy, in a way, if that makes sense. I'm not doing this justice. Basically, I'm trying to say that one of the things I liked about it was the tangential bits, but it was also one of the things that like overall detracted from it, I think. Another thing I want to say in its favor, though, is it has often really short paragraphs and like one sentence paragraphs. Like here you can kind of see. like really short lines and stuff like that. And I think I said somewhere, I don't remember where, I said it in an earlier video that I don't normally like that. Like I feel, oh yeah, it's about Dune. That's right, yeah, Dune does that and I hated it. But yeah, I don't normally like when a writer does that, because if you want to have a short paragraph, you're telling me this sentence, this little bit has something that needs to be separated from the whole for some reason. And normally I find it's not really worth it. Like you're just trying to like do a cheap like thrill of like like and then there was blood or something, and it just doesn't work for me normally. But in this case it does almost always, and I thought that was a huge accomplishment because I normally don't like this kind of writing. It's just that it made it sound poetic because the language was simple, and the short paragraphs almost always, not always, but almost always draw attention to something which I think deserves to be taken aside and thought of as just a sentence. Like, he's writing about, what's he writing about here? Like the park, and there's this, the Masaoka Shiki Memorial Baseball Field, named after the poet who played baseball, and he's just describing things, and then suddenly we get, listen, and then this is just a paragraph to itself. To speak is to stumble, to hesitate, to detour and hit dead ends. To listen is straightforward. You can always just listen. New paragraph. I hear a listless sort of screeching. New paragraph. Possibly the first cicadas of the year. And then like he goes into like thinking about the cicadas and stuff. But like to break the flow with those little things that are like kind of abstract and poetic, and then also mundane, like he's just hanging around listening to animals, and also cicadas are kind of like sounds like haiku and like impermanence and stuff like that, and it works really well. Oh, this is my favorite one. It's this is just a paragraph to itself, a little short paragraph. The 3 sparrows that were perched on the lamppost before have now gone. I am haunted by this day, today, and regardless of what I am now, I would have liked to exchange a glance with someone, anyone, even a sparrow. And that's it. The sparrows are now gone from the novel. It's brilliant. What a great way to break up a little paragraph, and then, you know, I don't know. So really beautiful writing appears in this book, but it just didn't really all hang together for me as a novel, if that makes sense. So overall, 4-star book. I don't know how I feel. I feel like that rating will change in time, but having just read it, 4-star book. So yeah, it was Passing 5 stars, Lincoln and the Bardo 3 stars, and then Tokyo Ueno Station 4 stars. So not a bad reading month. I do wonder if I'd read them in a different order, if it would have affected my ratings and my impressions. But anyway, it feels nice to be without a book. Like I've always had something going on the go for all of July. So now to finally just suddenly be bookless and to be able to dive into whatever I want is actually pretty exciting. So I'm gonna have to have a think about that now, and then let you know in a later video. Thanks for listening. Bye bye.